Hello, hello. So I decided to bring back the chapter by chapter vlog style video, and I'm going to be doing it with Iola Leroy. Her writing style is on point with some of the dialogue that is from the slaves that do not have the thick southern accent, but it's like they are using a different language. Then I have to interpret that. But that is not a criticism. I'm just explaining that that is something that's in here. So if you struggle with that because you also orate, then you might want to look into the audiobook as well. And then that way you can listen and see the words at the same time, which might help you get through it faster. I just want to put it out there. I think it's pretty obvious that I'm going into these books with a white lens, and that comes with a bit of ignorance. I don't have to think about race first when it comes to context and situations. When I'm reading stuff like this, sometimes that ignorance shows because I don't catch on to context that maybe a person of color would catch on to immediately. So, vulnerable thing number one. When I was reading chapter 1, a guy had came in to the cook's area, and he had snuck this newspaper back to the plantation, and he was really excited because the Yankees were winning. I legitimately thought they were talking about baseball. And I was like, I wonder why they want the Yankees, why they're all for the Yankees. What's special? Who's this other team they're talking about? Because they were calling them the Segregates, was the other team, which was the Confederates. And so you don't find out specifically, it doesn't say Confederates until you get into the author narrative, where she's not using any vernacular spellings and she's just spelling things with standard English. And I was like, oh. When I was reading it, I was thinking, I was like, these guys, they've got a lot going on in their life. I'm surprised that they're so excited about baseball. But at the same time, if you were a slave, I would think that you would find small pieces of happiness and things you could be joyful about. So I was like, maybe baseball is one of them. And then the girl was like, quiet down, don't get too excited. The missus will come out here and she'll be angry. She wants them segregates to win. And I seriously thought they were talking about baseball for 3 pages. And then I was like, wait a second, are they talking about the war? Is that going on during this time? And it was. So I was like, oh my gosh. So if this if this is happening in chapter 1, who knows what's gonna happen in chapter 2. I think there's gonna be a lot of aha moments throughout this book where I'm reading it one way and then I get several pages in and I'm like, yeah, that was not what I thought was going on at all. Just finished chapter 2 and wow, this book is so good. I also found an audiobook narration and wonderful. Just, this book is amazing. It's so good. It's just so good. She writes her characters so well, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe that this is a classic. Y'all, I think this is gonna be my favorite classic ever. And I've only read 2 chapters, but it is so good. So they had their little meeting where they were talking about the news that had come through, and they were just telling it to the other slaves so that they would be aware. And one of the older gentlemen was like, basically what was happening was they call the people from the North the Yankees. And so they were saying we're considered property, and if we get over to the North, the Yankees won't send us back because it would be like a horse from a warring side getting across enemy lines, and then they're not going to send it back. They would just keep the horse. It would be like a, whatever you call it. I guess the gains of war. I don't really know what the term is for it, but, so that's how they were about, slaves. If they were able to cross over, the Yankees wouldn't send them back to the South. So now people were starting to cross over, so that they would have their freedom in the North. So the slaves are talking to the other slaves, and they're like, we need to start doing this immediately. Like, if this is how it's happening, they're not going to send us back. Because I guess before the Yankees had started coming through, if you ran away, you would be sent back to your master. And sometimes you get like beat real bad and all this other kind of stuff. So now they're like, if we can just make it across, we'll be fine. And the older gentleman is like, I want y'all to have y'all's freedom, but I'm not going with y'all. And they're like, well, why don't you want to go with us? And so he says that he made a promise to, I guess, the last missus or whatever, or he made a promise to her that he would look after like the kids, and her husband went off to war, and she was like really kind to him before she had died, and was like, I would give you your freedom papers, but in the husband's will, he had it tied up where she basically didn't have any power over it, and even if she died, they were still slaves. They just go down, I guess, to the next family member. And but he was like, that lady died like a saint, that sort of thing. And then they were talking about how preachers would come in and preach to the slaves that like it's against the like rules of God or whatever to steal. So don't steal from your masters. Don't like talk back, all this other kind of stuff. So then the one person was like, I don't much like a white man's religion. And then another one was like, well, I like the good old Bible or whatever, but when they come in here and beat us and then want to preach to us, that don't make no sense. And then there was a preacher man who had talked about when he was dying, all he saw was like darkness. And they were saying, well, I reckon so, because like your heart is black because he would beat people. And so it's like, of course you're not going to be seeing, the light at the end of the tunnel. Like, you're not a good person. And so she was like, I like the good Lord, but I don't, I don't need them to come in here. These, basically saying these hypocrites to try to teach me about the differences between right and wrong. And I was like, I was like highlighting passages. I was like, I really like this. I really like this. But anyway, so I'm excited to get on to chapter 3. So in chapter 3, they're gathering again, which they're not supposed to gather. They can get in trouble for that. They don't want anybody coordinating. Some of them, if the people of the house see you trying to like pick up a book and learn to read, they might smack your fingers away, that sort of thing. But you get more context for why some of the slaves want to stay on the plantation, some of them want to leave, and also some of their history and their connections to the slave owners. So the one guy that's really adamant about staying, that made a promise to the current master who's off in the war, so he had really had a lot of respect for that guy's mother, which was the one that had died, because she had always went to bat for the slaves. She didn't want her household to have any slaves. She wanted them to all be free. And so she was constantly trying to get her husband to just let them free, but he would never do it. And so the husband did grant freedom to one guy on his deathbed, because he's like, I got no use for you now, you're dying. So if it'll make you happy, I'll write you the papers. And so he wrote it, and then the guy like died, and he was happy because he had a couple of minutes where he was technically free, even though he was on his deathbed. That guy, the woman's husband, also sold off another slave's wife and his mother. So he was like, yeah, I don't know how you could ever like these people. Like, they're horrible people. They ripped my family apart. And then another guy was like, I can't, like, I don't like them. I don't agree with them. I want my freedom, but I can't go because I need to stay here with my mom. And he doesn't trust any women other than his mama, because he had fell for somebody, and then I guess she got to be like a mistress or something of a different slaver who like bought her and then dressed her up in fancy clothes and all this other kind of stuff. He's like, I don't trust none of them no more, but I got to take care of my mama. And if we get caught trying to leave, she's not going to be able to pretend like that's not what we're doing, because she'll get scared and start crying and she'll die of fright, basically. And then they kept asking Uncle Tom, like, you can't think that they're as good as they say. And even if the current master had told Uncle Tom, like, I will write it in my will to where you are free when I die. He sees him as like family, and kind of like his father because he did raise him. So he's basically like clinging to him, like, I can't let you go, but when I die, no one will ever be your master again. And the other slaves are telling him, like, you can't trust a word out of their mouths. If he really liked you, he would write up the papers. And it's like, yeah, I mean, it's true. And so then the other thing was, is he was saying, y'all just don't understand, you know, what he's done for me and why I do trust him, because he had fell in love with this girl at a different plantation, like love at first sight sort of thing. And so he wanted to be with her, so he asked him to buy her off of the other plantation owner, and that guy said no. And they were like very abusive to their slaves, especially the wife. She's described as like being controlling on the plantation, like a man, having people whooped. If like a woman was slightly late because she was tending to her ailing spouse, she would have them whooped and all this other kind of stuff. Like, she just no bones about it. She didn't care. You were her property. And so they wouldn't sell the girl off. So the guy, Uncle Tom, was like, well, if you can just give me if they won't sell her to you, if you'll just give me the pass so I can just see her, like, we can get married and everything. So he gives him passes to be able to go to the other plantation to be with her every once in a while. And they wound up having a baby. Well, the baby dies because, I mean, just not even considering the stuff going on with the slavery element, but just the time period. Like, there's a lot of child loss, especially in that like first year. And so the child dies at like 4 months old. And so the woman had to go milk 30 cows. And so her baby had died. She had left the baby there to go do her job with milking the 30 cows. And when she had come back, someone had taken the dead child and buried the child. So they were like, she didn't even get to kiss her child goodbye. And then after that had happened, the master of that plantation, this guy, the one for their plantation, found out that he was having some financial issues. So he was able to finally buy her so that she could live with Uncle Tom. So that's why Uncle Tom is like, you know, he might be my slaver, but at least he's, you know, treated me the best he could, that sort of thing. And he like went out of his way to do this for me. And so he does have this complex relationship with him. And I like that we get to see the differences of the characters, how they're viewing the slavers, how they view their situation, all that kind of stuff. I feel like you don't get a lot of that nuance, especially with the education system in the South. I remember we were told, yes, about like being able to run away and go to the North. But we were also very much so told, you know, it must not have been all that bad. A lot of the plantation owners were kind, because if that hadn't been the case, why did so many slaves stay where they were after the war? So it's kind of like trying to paint the South like, oh, not all the slavers were bad. So therefore, like, the South ain't that bad because, some of the slavers treated their slaves okay. But it's like you don't get to justify this. You're still taking ownership of another human being. But it's interesting how things were kind of like put out in history classes where people would bring up the fact that some of the slaves chose to stay. And it's like, but did they really choose? Because if you've got people who are old and they know that just them trying to get across the line is a risk, and then their amount of time to live in freedom is not going to be that long. And then if they get taken to some other plantation owner's house because they ran away, that is abusive. Like, why would you want to take that risk if you feel like your current setup is better than what it could be? So it just gives a lot of nuance to it, and I enjoy reading it. I really like these characters. She just makes them so individual and unique, and I just really, really enjoyed this book. Y'all, if you have Amazon Prime, you can read it and listen to it for free. Free. Like, there's absolutely no reason to not try this story. And I already found the next book, Passing, on audiobook on Hoopla as well. So get on that if you haven't already, because I'm really excited about that one too. I'm excited about what's going to happen next in the story. Like, this is just so unexpectedly good. I had high hopes for it just from the fact that it was short and it kind of reads like a first person, even though it's not. It just has like a lot of immediacy to it. And I could tell that the pacing was going to be good based off of how short the chapters were. And so it's just so pleasantly surprising just how absolutely good this book is, to the point where even though I'm not a classics girly, I'm getting into it, like I'm exploring, but I am new to this genre. Like, y'all have seen me this journey other than high school, my classic stuff, and as far as reading by my own free will, was Peter Pan and Pride and Prejudice. That was it. Peter Pan and Pride and Prejudice were the only classics that I read by choice. And because I enjoyed both of those, then I went on to create the I Read Dead People book club. And so now I'm reading a classic a month. But I will tell you, this one is so good. And it's the credit not only just to the story itself, but just to the author's talent, that I feel like she is going to be an author that I'm going to want her to read more books from. Because this is it's just perfection. It's so good. It is so good. I cannot tell you all how good this is. And I'm only 3 chapters in. If you have not tried a classic before, try this. Try this. It's like, it's rooted, it's a reflection of the past and the things that happen, but also it just works as a fictional story as well. Like, just all the elements to a great story are in there. So even if you don't like any like historical stuff like that, still just give this thing a try. It's just so atmospheric. I just feel like I'm there seeing everything through their eyes, and I'm just like, oh my gosh. And so we've heard about some like heart-wrenching things that have happened, but we haven't seen them yet as far as currently happening to these characters. And I'm like, if we're following them when they do escape and try to get their freedom, I don't know what's going to happen. This might wind up being a tearjerker. I don't know. I don't know. But I am here for the ride. I am here for the ride. Just finished chapter 4. The Union Army is now in sight, and they are trying to recruit slaves. They're telling them that they have their freedom now because Lincoln had signed it into order, and they are going to take down the people that are there. So they need as many people to enlist as they can to get them on their sides. So now they're rallying up in groups, and so there's groups of the slaves going together to enlist and then fight for their freedom, because they're talking about giving them like wages and all this other kind of stuff for fighting in the war. So now that they can literally see the army there, they are like, okay, now the risk isn't as high. They're within sight. I can just hail them down and then I'll get protection. And so they're just going in droves over to go fight. And I'm sitting here like, that is so dangerous. I'm like, if you're freeing the people, I feel like they've already been through so much. They shouldn't have to fight for their freedom. Like, you should have a group of them just getting them to safety and then you fight for them. Like, you shouldn't have to fight for yourself. You've already been done wrong so long. I feel like it should just be like, hey, we're here. Let's take you to safety, and then that be it. But that's not how it works. But I'm just like, man, they've already suffered so much. Now you want them to put their lives on the line, and I'm just like, if you really want to just help them, just get them to safety, and then y'all just take care of the rest. Y'all just take care of the rest. Like, why are they having to put their lives at risk? And it's like, yeah, fight for your freedom, but at the same time, it never should have been taken from you in the first place. So I'm just like, man. Oh, so now Uncle Tom, which is the one that was like, I'm going to stay here, I'm going to stay here. Now he's like, now that freedom is in sight, I want it. Like, I want my freedom. So things are changing. Things are changing on the plantation. And I'm ready for chapter 5. And it has the word Iola Leroy in there. So now we get to figure out who she is. And I guess more about what the story is going to turn into. Because right now it kind of feels like the setup for the story that was blurbed. We haven't actually got to the story yet. So I don't know what I'm in for, y'all. I don't know what I'm in for, but I'm ready. I don't know that I'm going to be able to go to bed tonight. This is so good. But it's also an 8-hour long audiobook, so I'm going to have to go to bed. But, like, I don't want to stop. I don't want to stop. I'm done with chapter 5. So they spot this really pretty girl. Basically, she's white passing. She's got super fair skin, blue eyes, and she's been sold around to like 7 different plantation owners because she's just so pretty. Everybody wants her. And so she winds up with this super abusive one that basically just wants to have her whipped, and all this other kind of stuff. So Tom goes to the general of the Union Army, I guess the Yankees or whatever, and he's like, we need to get her out of there. So they get her released from the plantation, and then they employ her as a nurse. And then there's another guy that wants to fight in the war, but he has like some deformity or something like that, so they won't let him fight. So they basically still have him working as a servant, but he's able to do some stuff that he's already got some skills in from his time in slavery. So don't really know how all that's going to go, but Tom's basically like, he's like, I really like her, I want her. And you're already kind of getting to see some of the colorism and like how favorable this light-skinned person is. And they're like, she don't look like she worked a day in her life, and he wants her to do this, this, and this, this, and this. So it's going to be interesting because Iola Leroy is the title of the book. So I'm like, she's going to come into play more in this thing. So I don't know what's going to happen here. I really don't. I don't know what's going to happen. I think someone does fall in love with her that's like a white man. And so there might be something that has to do with passing as well. But I'm not positive exactly what the plot line is going to be with this story. But the book is definitely getting interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and continue on with chapter 6. Done with chapter 6. And so now Robert is talking to one of the generals or colonels, whatever, colonels, people. Anyway, so he's talking to him, and so he knows how to read and write and all of that kind of stuff. And he's also very like light-skinned, white passing. And so the guy was like, why don't you enlist in the regular army? Because you could go up in the ranks fast with like how smart you are and everything. Like, it's such a shame that anyone ever thought to make a slave out of you. And he was like, even the blackest of black, it wouldn't have been right. And the guy's like, well, you're right about that. And then he goes into why he had enlisted in the army because he was from Maine and he wanted to free the slaves, so he had enlisted. However, not everyone from the North that was fighting to free the slaves actually cared about the slaves. So they didn't like slavery itself, but they still didn't like black people. They were still racist, many of them were. And so they had segregation between the troops as well. And oftentimes they would put the people that were the slaves at the front of the lines to kind of like be their shields, I guess you would say. Um, and so there's a line in there about like, well, I'm sure the white soldiers would definitely want to put their black substitutes at the head to basically take the bullets. And I'm just like, oh my. And yeah, so some of them, I guess, had already been into the military, so they didn't need to enlist. They were already required to serve. So when Lincoln sided over that the slaves were free, and then they had to go in and, like inform and also uh, make sure it happens, I guess. Inform and enforce. Um, Not all of them were happy, and some of them was like, I will desert before I will fight alongside. And of course, they used the very bad terms. And so, yeah, the North wasn't all great either. It was bad on both sides. So it's interesting to kind of see this. And again, this book was written right after emancipation. So, like, this person the writer went to different plantations across the South, every state but Arkansas, and one other, I can't remember what the other one was. So she like talked to these people, and I feel like her research as far as going place to place has really helped with this book. Everything just reads so well, and it's just a really good book. Yeah, so on to chapter 7. I can't stop. I should go to bed. It's probably past like 1:30 a.m. But it's good. It is exactly, it's 1:31. I was 1 minute off. I actually said it's probably past 1:30, and it is. It's 1:31. Sometimes I surprise myself with how I just predict the future. I know the exact time before I look at it. It's weird. I must be psychic. Anyway. It done got me all. Chapter 7. Golly. Oh. I don't think I've ever read a character as sweet as Tom. Oh my gosh. So, Tom died. Not of natural causes. Oh man, but what a way to go out. Like, it is definitely Tom's style to go out like that. And so basically, he and a bunch of other soldiers were in a boat. And so they were on a river or whatever in the boat, and they ran up against a mud bank, and they couldn't just use the oars to get back into the water because, of course, their bodies being inside was too heavy. And then the soldiers were closing in on them. So Tom was like, all right, I reckon the only way we're going to get out of this is if one of us gets out of the boat and pushes it back into the water. Like, one of us will basically have to die to get us out of this. And he's like, I reckon it should be me. And they're like, no, no, no. And he's like, there's nothing else we can do. So he gets out and he's pushing them back in the water, and he gets shot like 8 times. 8 times. But here's the thing. Tom don't go down easy. So they wind up, he's able to get back in the boat. They get him back to like the campground or whatever. And then they have Iola look over him, which is like the nurse that he's smitten with. And she's like, the doctor comes and sees and is like, there's no hope but make him comfortable. And like he's gonna die. And so Iola is like, what can I do for you, Tom? Like, what can I do for you? And he said, just hold my hand and sing me this song. And so she does. She sings him the song and holds his hand. And then he passes. And his friend had got to come in there and, tell him goodbye too by, I guess, joining in with the song or whatever. But it was like his signal to him, like, it's okay. And then he passes. And then Iola asked the doctor, like, did he pass out? And he's like, no, he's gone. Like, never to breathe again, that sort of thing. I was just like, oh, my poor Tom. My poor Tom. But anyway. Oh, it's like 2 a.m. now. I should probably go to bed. But this book is so good. It's so good. Y'all. I've read 207 books this year, I believe. It's around 207. And let me tell you, this one belongs on the favorites list already, and we're only 7 chapters in. Yeah, so I've read 206 books, so this one will be my 207th, unless I didn't write Wuthering Heights on here yet, which I may not have. Yeah, so this one will be 207 when I finish it. Top of the list, top tier. Finished chapter 8. So this one, the colonel is talking with the doctor, and the doctor is basically saying that he is vexed by Iola. And so the guy's like, what is vexing you? And he says, I just don't understand. Like, I fight for, the slaves and all that stuff for their freedom, and I dine with them, and I side with them, but I just can't imagine kissing one of them, because he saw Iola kiss Tom on his deathbed, and he was like, I just don't understand that. And then the colonel was like, I can let you in on a secret, but don't tell anyone about it. And so he's like, okay. And then he tells him that he had got her out of the plantation where she was a slave at, so that she was a slave. And the guy was like, what? How can it be so? Like, she's white. She's white as snow. And it's like, well, people mingle. And so that was also brought up in an earlier chapter where one of the guys who was also white passing, he was like, I suspect that the plantation owner was my father. And so he's like, I just don't understand how they can treat us this way, like we're the scum of the earth or whatever, but then want to procreate with us. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And but yeah, so then he tells him that, and then the guy's like, well, I'm glad you told me. That changes everything. Like, he no longer would want to be interested in her because he doesn't think it's okay to like intermingle and stuff like that. And so then he's still so smitten with her even after this point where he's told himself, like, I can't be with her because, her blood is not white and all that other kind of stuff. And he's like, I'm from an aristocratic North family that would not stand But then he still likes her, so he winds up proposing to her, and his plan is basically to send her to the north to live with his family for a while and to never have her secret exposed. So I think that this book might have partly to do with her, and if she makes a decision to kind of live out her life as a white passing person. Um, and then maybe also follows Robert, who is a soldier, who is also very much so white by appearance, and he doesn't want to fight with the white regimen. He wants to fight with, his people, because he's like, you can say I'm white all you want, but that's not my life. Like, I was in slavery and everything like that, and um, I was treated the same, so I would feel much less comfortable in a white regimen than I would, with the other people that were in slavery with me. So I think it's going to be interesting to see the characters' two different paths based off of their decision. I don't know if that's what's going to happen in this book, or if maybe I'm mixing in some of the blurb for the book Passing, because I believe that one has to do with two siblings, and one of them chooses to live life as being black, and one of them chooses to live life as being white. So I'm not quite sure if I'm mixing plot lines or if they both have a similar plot line. I'm really not sure, but I am definitely interested. I think I'm going to listen to chapter 9 and then chapter 10 and go to bed, because it's 2:25. I was watching YouTube videos in between. It didn't take that long to read a chapter. But but yeah, this book is very, very, very good. Chapter 9 takes us 20 years in the past, where we get to meet Iola's father and get to learn how she came to be. So he's having a conversation with one of his friends, and he had ventured to different areas, like all over the world and stuff like that. He got sick somewhere, and one of the girls that grew up on his plantation as one of the slaves worked as like a nurse to him, kind of, nursed him back to health and all that kind of stuff. And he fell in love with her. So he decides that he's going to marry her. So what he did was he sent her to the north, because she's very white. So he sent her to the north, and then to go be educated at this school with other women. And so the schoolmaster had found out that she didn't have like pure white blood, if you know what I'm saying. And because they had the whole one drop rule back then. So if you had one drop of, and then they use the N word and all that stuff, but if you had one drop, then you were considered to be that. And so they despise that because they're racist. And so anyway, they kicked her out of the school because they don't want anyone to be empowered, because they see their race as like being superior in all ways. And so then he has to find another school that had people that had known mixed race origins, that were allowed to continue their education. So he sent her there, and then now she's going to graduate. So he's going to go up north, marry her, have kids with her, claim them as his own, all that kind of stuff. In the South, he could take her as like kind of like a mistress or just someone to sleep around with, and it would be frowned on, but no one would really do anything. And if he married her in the South, then he would lose everything. So he would lose his caste, all of that kind of stuff. It would be gone. And so this guy was like, I would rather follow you to your grave than go up with you in north to see you marry this woman. And so he's also telling the guy that he sees fault in the whole thing with slavery. He doesn't think that it's right. And it's like they were born into it, where that was a normal thing for them growing up. Like they didn't take on the slaves, they just kind of inherited them. But he's like, don't you see fault in this? And the other guy's like, well, I didn't get talked into it, and I'm not going to be getting talked out of it, like to keep the slaves. And also when they were talking about the girl and she's describing how beautiful she is, and the guy is talking about how um, like the women who are mixed race but look like just completely white are like the ruin of families and all this other kind of stuff. So he, talks back about that too. And then um, he's also saying there's one part where he's like, oh, but even though she's mixed race, like no one would ever know. She's only kind of she's only a little black is basically what he's saying. And then the guy was like, I don't care if she's as white as a lily, she's still tainted. Because again, the one drop rule, the thought that if you had any blood that was not like the Aryan race, that you were inferior. And so the friend is just like very blatantly racist. But anyway, so when he's explaining to the guy that he's in love with her, he says, she is very beautiful. In the north, no one would suspect that she has one drop of, and then they use the N word, blood in her veins. But here, where I am known to marry her is to lose caste. I could live with her and not incur much of any social opprobrium. Society would wink at the transgression, even if after she had become the mother of my children, I should cast her off and send her and them to the auction block. And then later he says, but Alfred, suppose it is so, talking about, I'll go back a little bit. Why, Eugene, what has come over you, talking of the virtues of these quadroon girls? You have lived so long in the north and abroad that you seem to have lost the cue of our southern life. Don't you know that these beautiful girls have been the curse of our southern the curse of our southern homes? You have no idea of the hearts which are wrung by their presence, because the slave owners wind up procreating with their slaves. And then he says, but Alfred, suppose it is so, are they to blame for it? What can any woman do when she is placed in the hands of an irresponsible master, when she knows that resistance is vain? Yes, Alfred, I agree with you. These women are the bane of our southern civilization, but they are the victims and we are the criminals. So I like that he recognizes that. And then the other guy says, I think from the airs that some of them put on when they get a chance that they are very willing victims. And so he responds back and says, so much the worse for our institution. If it is cruel to debase a hapless victim, it is an increase of cruelty to make her contented with her degradation. Let me tell you, Alf, you cannot wrong or degrade a woman without wronging or degrading yourself. So, yeah, he is snapping back with some truths. So now I'm going to get into the next chapter. So I think what happens is when her father dies, and if they find out that her mother was black, even though she was white passing, again, one drop rule, she's going to go back into slavery, because that's just how it worked. And it's interesting because I didn't know this book would have all of that, and I just never thought of people passing that well back then. But yeah, like I've said stuff in live shows, but like I took a DNA test, so I do have African heritage from both Southern and Northern Africa. And I've also looked at like the cousins and stuff that you have, and then the shared ancestors. So it was very much so a thing where one of my ancestors probably was brought over as a slave, because it was the same time period when I was related to them, like when they would have been around. So like even now, like right now, today, if the one drop rule was still instituted and they had never gotten rid of slavery, then that would have applied to me. I don't claim mixed race because I don't face any injustices due to having a small percentage that's not like European ancestry, but like it's just interesting that that would still apply. And the thing is that you would never know just by looking at someone. And to me, like, race isn't really necessarily skin tone, it's more so how you were perceived by other people and how that affects your view on life and how you're treated. So that's what it is to me. That's why I'm like, even though my DNA results have this, and this in there, I know that I am still always going to be perceived as white and treated as white. So I'm not going to like change my whole identity like some people do after receiving DNA test. But it is interesting knowing that now that that would be part of my ancestry and how things would be if things hadn't changed, that these same sort of issues would have affected me. It does make a little bit of a difference when going into these books because I think all people kind of suspect somewhere down the line you might have an ancestor that's not the same race that you currently identify with, that may have been involved with the slave trade, um, either as an oppressor or as the victim of it. And yeah, but knowing for sure is like interesting too. So anyway, that's one of the reasons why I'm wanting to read these particular books that do have to do with characters who are white passing, because I think it's just so interesting. And like with my own family line, you could see that there was a clear departure, where one side of the descendants, they didn't continue to like intermingle, um, and like marry and marry and marry and marry and marry a bunch of white people. But instead, they kind of kept, uh, so that, that wouldn't be the case. And so there is like a divide. And so it's interesting to kind of get into the mindset and be like, okay, where do those decisions come from? Because you can kind of have your own uh, thoughts on maybe why people made certain decisions, but like actually getting to read from people from that time period and getting to see, uh, it's just interesting. I like this. It's enjoyable. Like there's a lot of tough things going on, but it's still an enjoyable read. Um, it's just a really good book. Okay, so I just finished chapter 10. It was a little bit longer. Um, so this one, I put little flags on lots of different texts. So he did go up north. He married her, but then they also came back to the plantation in the south. And so she was talking to him about, um, she's getting bored in the house because she's not allowed to go out and about, because if she does, then people would know that they were married. And then she winds up having 3 kids with him, and then they're stuck on the plantation as well, because if they go out, people would put 2 and 2 together. So now that the kids are growing up, she's like, they need to get education. So they have to find a school in the north for them and then confide in one of the deans or whatever, their lineage. Because again, if it's found out and the person isn't trustworthy, they can sell them, do whatever they want to with them. And so anyway, there's lots of little highlighted passages. So she says, my dear husband, this is a wrong where reparation is impossible. Talking about not claiming children, um, through procreation with slaves, that sort of thing. Neither wealth nor education can repair the wrongs of a dishonored birth. There are a number of slaves in this section who are servants to their own brothers and sisters, whose fathers have robbed them not simply of liberty, but of the right of being well born. Do you think these things will last forever? And then he's saying, like, no, I don't think it's going to last forever. Like, the rebellion is already starting. People will eventually be freed. And then he says, Marie, slavery is a sword that cuts both ways. It wrongs the slaves. It curses the white man. But we are in it, and what can we do? She says, get out of it as quickly as possible. He says, that is easier said than done. I would willingly free every slave on my plantation if I could do so without expatriating them. Some of them have wives and children on other plantations, and to free them is to separate them from their kith and kin. To let them remain here as a free people is out of the question. My hands are tied by law and custom. And then she says, who tied them? And he says, a public opinion whose meshes I cannot break. And then another inappropriate word, is the thrall of his master. We are just as much the thralls of public opinion. She says, why do you not battle against public opinion if you think it is wrong? Because I have neither the courage of a martyr nor the faith of a saint, and so I drift along, trying to make the condition of our slaves as comfortable as I possibly can. I believe there are slaves on this plantation whom the most flattering offers of freedom would not entice away. And then, here's the kicker, here's what she says to that. I do not think, said Marie, that some of your planters understand your own slaves. Lying is said to be the vice of slaves. The more intelligent of them have so learned to veil their feelings that you do not see the undercurrent of discontent beneath their apparent good humor and jollity. The more discontented they are, the more I respect them. To me, the more I respect them. To me, a contented slave is an abject creature. I hope that I shall see the day when there will not be a slave in the land. I hate the whole thing from the bottom of my heart. And then in another part, she says, I am so afraid that you will regret our marriage when you fully realize the complications it brings. And he says, no, it is not that I regret our marriage or feel the least disdain for our children on account of the blood in their veins, but I do not wish them to grow up under the contracting influence of this race prejudice. I do not wish them to feel that they have been born under a prescription from which no valor can redeem them, nor that any social advancement or individual development can wipe off the ban which clings to them. No, Marie, let them go north, learn all they can, aspire all they may. The painful knowledge will come all too soon. Do not forestall it. I want them simply to grow up as other children, not being patronized by friends nor disdained by foes. So she's talking about the fear of if he dies that they could be put back into slavery, so she doesn't feel safe still being in the South, and she doesn't really want her children to still be there either. And so they've agreed to keep the children's ancestry a secret, and they don't want them to grow up knowing that, because then they could also be fearful. But they already get looks from others. So the kids already get looks. Like, people know where they came from, even if they're not saying it. And one of the boys was called the N-word by like a neighbor kid or something like that. So they're getting old enough now where it's like, we gotta move them out of here. So they wind up finding a school for them in the north to go to. And that's all that has happened in the first 10 chapters. So I would love to stay up and continue this, but the first 10 chapters, this is very, very small print, was 42 pages, and this book is 134. So I cannot do another 90 pages right now because it's bedtime. It's probably 3:37, I'm gonna guess. It's 3:27. I was off 10 minutes. And I almost said 3:27. But I was like, nah, maybe it's later. So yeah, I need to get my butt in bed. My husband's gonna be up in an hour to go to work. And if I'm still up when he gets up, he's gonna be like, honey, you've thrown off your sleep schedule. And I'm gonna be like, yep, you're right, I've thrown it off, but it's been like the last 3 nights where I've went to bed at 3 a.m. So I'm just like, whatever. So I'm gonna go to bed, and then I will be live sprinting in 8 hours, no, less than 8 hours. At 11 o'clock, so in 7 hours and 30 minutes, I will be on YouTube. So I need to go get some sleep. If y'all are curious when I'm filming this, it's on the 10th of December. When this will get released, I don't know. But it's the 10th of December right now. And I had already read 1 chapter yesterday. But like my yesterday, so like the 8th. And then I just read all this in one setting. The chapter 2 through 10 I just read in one sitting. But it's bedtime. It's bedtime. Dun bedtime. Dun 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 dun. It's bedtime. If any of y'all know what song that is, let me know in the comments down below. It is a real song. It's by Ninja Sex Party. That's what the page is called. And my husband will come in here sometimes with his phone because it'll be late, and he knows, like, when my sleep schedule gets thrown off, it messes me up for like a whole week. So he tries to remind me to go to bed, and I have alarms to remind me to get ready to wind down because I have problems with sleep. But anyway, he'll have it on his phone, and he'll have that song playing. It's bedtime. It's effing bedtime. Da 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 da. All right, I'm going to bed. It's definitely hitting the emotions. This book is hitting the emotions. Oh my gosh. So I just finished chapter 11. Oh. So they're going to go visit their daughter at the school, and she's being moved to like another part of the boarding because the schoolmaster had let in a black child, and 2 of the southern boys that went to the school didn't like that. So then, like, that there was a danger for her being there, because if they found out about her, that could make matters worse. And the schoolmaster is like an abolitionist, so he's like, I'm not going to make this other girl leave. Like, he let her into the school, he's going to let her stay there. And so they were going to move her to another boarding part, just so, again, less suspicion would be cast on her, that sort of thing. And while they're on the way to go see her at her school, yellow fever is spreading to the south, and they don't make it to all the way to the north before the guy, Eugene, which is the plantation owner, before he dies. And the thing is, it's like, Eugene is not the best because he did have slaves, but their, like, romance was true, even if it was not the best because, there's a difference of the power dynamic and everything like that. But he did marry her like as his lawful wife and like claimed all of his children and left everything to her in the will, all that kind of stuff. But it didn't matter because the cousin knew that she had the ancestry in her blood, and he was like, "Well, you've got that, so you don't have any rights here." And so he gets the law to come in, and he invalidates her marriage, and he takes everything, and he also puts her and the children back into slavery. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, because throughout this whole section where we're learning about Iola Leroy's parents, Marie, which is the mom, was so scared that something like this was going to happen. And she knew that the cousin didn't like her because of the fact that she wasn't white. And so it said Lorraine, which is the cousin. Lorraine made a careful investigation of the case to ascertain whether Marie's marriage was valid. To his delight, he found there was a flaw in the marriage and an informality in the manumission. He then determined to invalidate Marie's claim and divide the inheritance among Leroy's white relations. In a short time, strangers, distant relatives of her husband, became frequent visitors at the plantation and made themselves offensively familiar. At length, the dreadful storm burst. Alfred Lorraine entered suit for his cousin's estate and for the remanding of his wife and children to slavery. He has 3 kids. In the short time, he came armed with legal authority and said to Marie, "I have come to take possession of these premises." "By what authority?" she gasped, turning deathly pale. He hesitated a moment as his words were arrested by a sense of shame. Really? He feels shame? I don't think so. I don't think he feels anything. "By what authority?" she again demanded. "By the authority of the law," answered Lorraine, "which has decided that Leroy's legal heirs are his white blood relations, and that your marriage is null and void." And she's got a marriage certificate and everything, and he says, "Your marriage certificate is not worth the paper it is written on." She thinks that he's just being cruel, and then he's like, "Well, I talked to Judge Starkins, and he has decided that your manumission is unlawful, your marriage a bad precedent, and inimical, I don't know what that word is, to the welfare of our society, and that you and your children are remanded to slavery." And I'm just like, knowing the dread that she was facing the whole time that she was married to him, and it being like, yeah, he brought her out of that situation, but she never felt like she was actually free and protected because she knew the truth. And the thing is, too, is that they hid this from the children. So the children did not know what their past was and that their mother had been a slave. And so they are just getting, they don't know any of this stuff. So then to not know that and then to be thrown into slavery, that would be very rough. So I just feel for everybody in this chapter. Except for Lorraine. He's horrible and despicable. I hope he dies of yellow fever next. Because that's the other thing. Then Marie gets sick with the yellow fever. And the daughter, Gracie, won't leave her bedside. And she winds up getting sick too. They call it the brain fever. So I think she's going to die. Which means that there's just going to be Iola and Iola's brother. If Iola's brother didn't die already, I can't really remember. Oh my gosh, this is just, it's starting to be, it's starting to get more, like there's more emotional stuff coming. But anyway, I'm going to keep reading, but oh my. So I just finished this chapter, and so Lorraine, which was the cousin, sent his lawyer or whatever to go get Iola from her school. But Lorraine did not know where the son was at because he was at a different school. So he did this whole trickery thing and sent a telegram to Iola's school, pretending like it was from the mother, saying that the dad was on his deathbed when he had already died, to trick the schoolmaster into letting her go back to the South. And so, yeah, they tricked him, so now she's in the South, and she's going to be a slave like everybody else. And so, there's lots of quotes that I put on here. At the beginning of the chapter, Iola is talking with another schoolgirl, who is more on the side of like the abolitionist, and she thinks that slavery is wrong and can never be condoned. And Iola says, "Slavery can't be wrong," she would say, "for my father is a slaveholder, and my mother is as good to our servants as she can be. My father often tells her that she spoils them and lets them run over her. I never saw my father strike one of them. I love my Mamie as much as I do my own mother, and I believe she loves us just as if we were her own children. When we are sick, I am sure that she could not do anything more for us than she does." "But Iola," responded one of her school friends, "after all, they are not free. Would you be satisfied to have the most beautiful home, the costliest jewels, or the most elegant wardrobe if you were a slave?" "Oh, the cases are not parallel. Our slaves do not want their freedom. They would not take it if it were given to them." "That is not the case with them all. My father has seen men who have encountered almost incredible hardships to get their freedom. Iola, did you ever attend an anti-slavery meeting?" "No, I don't think these abolitionists have any right to meddle in our affairs. I believe they are prejudiced against us and want to get our property. I read about them in the papers when I was at home. I don't want to hear my part of the country run down. My father says the slaves would be very well contented if no one would put wrong notions in their heads." "I don't know," was the response of her friend, "but I do not think that slave mother who took her 4 children, crossed the Ohio River on the ice, killed one of the children, and attempted the lives of the other 2, was a contented slave, and that other one, who, running away and finding herself pursued, threw herself over the long bridge into the Potomac, was evidently not satisfied. I do not think the numbers who are coming north on the Underground Railroad can be very contented. It is not natural for people to run away from happiness, and if they are so happy and contented, why did Congress pass the Fugitive Slave Bill?" "Well, I don't think," answered Iola, "any of our slaves would run away. I know Mama don't like slavery very much, but I've often heard her say that she hoped the time would come when there would not be a slave in the land. My father does not think as she does. He thinks slavery is not wrong if you treat them well and don't sell them from their families. I intend, after I've graduated, to persuade Papa to buy a house in New Orleans and spend the winter there. You know this will be my first season out, and I hope that you will come and spend the winter with me. We will have such gay times, and you will so fall in love with our sunny South that you will never want to come back to shiver amid the snows and the cold of the North. I think one winter in the South would cure you of your abolitionism." And remember, Iola doesn't know yet she's about to be a slave. And so then this woman, Camille, is talking to Louis Bastine, who is going on the cousin Lorraine's behalf to go get Iola from the school to sell her into slavery. "I always feel sorry," said Camille, "when I see one of those Creole girls brought to the auction block. I have known fathers who were deeply devoted to their daughters, but who, through some reverse of fortune, were forced to part with them, and I always think the blow has been equally terrible on both sides. I had a friend who had 2 beautiful daughters whom he had educated in the North. They were cultured and really belles in society. They were entirely ignorant of their lineage, but when their father died, it was discovered that their mother had been a slave. It was a fearful blow. They would have faced poverty, but the knowledge of their tainted blood was more than they could bear. They both died, poor girls. I believe they were as much killed by the blow as if they had been shot. To tell you the truth, Bastine, I feel sorry for this girl. I don't believe she has the least idea of her blood. And then he's confirming that she doesn't. And then, poor Iola, when she said slavery was not a bad thing, like, did she think that she was destined to drink to its bitter dregs the cup she was so ready to press to the lips of others? How do you think she will take her situation? Asked Camille. Oh, I guess, said Basine, she will sulk and take it pretty hard at first, but if she is managed right, she will soon get over it. Give her plenty of jewelry, fine clothes, and an easy time. And then Iola is at her mother's bedside. So the mother did not die of yellow fever, but she did get sick with it, and so did the daughter. The daughter does die at the end of this chapter with the yellow fever, but the mom recovers. And so anyway, and so the mom was saying that the fever has exhausted all her rallying power, and yet, dear as she is to me, I would rather consign her to the deepest grave than see her forced to be a slave. So would I. I wish I could die myself. That's what Iola says. Oh, Iola, do not talk so. Strive to be a Christian, to have faith in the darkest hour. Were it not for my hope of heaven, I couldn't stand all this trouble. Mother, are these people Christians who made these laws which are robbing us of our inheritance and reducing us to slavery? If this is Christianity, I hate and despise it. Would the most cruel heathen do worse? My dear child, I have not learned my Christianity from them. I have learned it at the foot of the cross and from this book, she said, placing a New Testament in Iola's hands. Some of the most beautiful lessons of faith and trust I have ever learned were from among our lowly people in their humble cabins. And so then the younger daughter, Gracie, dies, and she's pleading with Iola to find a way to write a letter to Harry and warn him to never come back home, because then he'll be put into slavery, because the uncle doesn't know where he's at, so they can't get to him. I'm just like, oh my. Oh my. Oh my. It's interesting because I think this is the case for people even now when they're talking about like immigration. So like people that are here illegally, and if you're the child of an immigrant but you don't know that they didn't legally come over here, then you could be like taken away and deported, and not knowing. And so if you're on the outside of it and you're like, this doesn't affect me, you might think one way. You might have like a nationalist view of just come over here legally. But then if you're the child of someone who came over illegally and you grew up your whole life as an American and didn't know, and then you were forced to go to a country that you'd never even been to, or you didn't remember because you were born over there, that would be hard, and it would probably change your opinions greatly. And so that's kind of what's going on with Iola. So she had one view of slavery when she was the oppressor, and now she has a different view of slavery now that she is going to be the oppressed. It's much scarier. It's much more personal. So yeah, it's an interesting book. I've probably said that like 100 times, but yeah, I'm really liking this book, and I want to see what's going to happen next. The other thing is that she does titles at the beginning of each chapter. So sometimes you know that a character is going to die from the chapter title. So if you don't like any spoilers, probably don't read the chapter titles. But I mean, if you're listening to an audiobook, you can't really ignore it. But the next title is A Rejected Suitor. So who knows what that's going to be. It says Dr. Grisham. So I think it's hopping back into the future now that we know how Iola got to be a slave and what her origins were. Now we're picking back up with the original story, and where she has been proposed to by the doctor, and we get to see what she has to say about it. And I wonder how much her mother told her afterward of her situation of marrying someone to get out of slavery, and if she's going to decide to do the same thing. Will history repeat itself? So we find out that she was separated from her mother in chapter 13, and then she's being proposed to by this white doctor, and she's rejecting him and telling him, like, hey, you don't understand. Like, there's irrevocable differences between us that you're not aware of. And then she tells him her history, and he's basically, oh, like, that doesn't really matter. But then she says, suppose we were to get married and we were to have children, and one of them had unmistakable signs of not being white. Like, how would you feel then? And he hesitates. And so he wasn't thinking about what could come of their marriage as far as offspring. And she was like, that's what I thought. And so, so she's like, no, I'm not going to marry you. And then she also vowed to never marry anyone until she finds her mother. And also we find out that they use the word abased, which I think it's talking about sexually assaulted by different people, because she's talking about how she doesn't think she could ever be with white men because of those situations. And he was like, would you hold me responsible for a few? And, yeah, let me see. Okay, so she says, he says, Iola, you do not understand me. You think too meanly of me. You must not judge me by the worst of my race. Surely our country has produced a higher type of manhood than the men by whom you were tried and tempted. Tried, but not tempted, said Iola, as a deep flush overspread her face. I was never tempted. I was sold from state to state as an article of merchandise. I had outrages heaped on me which might well crimson the cheek of honest womanhood with shame. But I never fell into the clutches of an owner for whom I did not feel the utmost loathing and intensest horror. I have heard men talking glibly of the degradation of her race, but there is a vast difference between abasement of condition and degradation of character. I was abased, but the men who trampled on me were the degraded ones. But Iola, you must not blame all for what a few have done. A few have done? Did not the whole nation consent to our abasement? Asked Iola bitterly. No, Miss Iola, we did not consent to it. Slavery drew a line of cleavage in the country. Although we were under one government, we were farther apart in our sentiments than if we had been divided by lofty mountains and separated by wide seas. And had not the northern sentiment been brought to bear against the institution, slavery would have been intact until today. And then she's like, but doctor, my race is under a social ban, both north and south. Our enemies have ear of the world, and they can depict us just as they please. That is true. But you have no other alternative than to make friends of his calamities. Other men have pled this cause. But out of the race must come its own defenders. With them the pen must be mightier than the sword. It is the weapon of civilization, and they must use it to their own defense. We cannot tell what is in them until they express themselves. Yes, and I think there is a large amount of latent and undeveloped ability in the race, which they will learn to use for their own benefit. This my hospital experience has taught me. And so he's like, but they must learn to struggle, labor, and achieve. By facts, not theories, they will be judged in the future. The Anglo-Saxon race is proud, domineering, aggressive, and impatient of a rival, and as I think, has more capacity for dragging down a weaker race than uplifting it. They have been a conquering and achieving people. Marvelous in their triumphs of mind over matter, they have manifested the traits of character which are developed by success and victory. And yet, said Iola earnestly, I believe the time will come when the civilization of my race will assume a better phase than you Anglo-Saxons possess. You will prove unworthy of your high vantage ground if you only use your superior ability to victimize feebler races and minister to the selfish greed of gold and love of domination. So, and then he's like, but Iola, what has all this to do with our marriage? Your complexion is as fair as mine. What is to hinder you from sharing my northern home, from having my mother be your mother? The tones of his voice grew tender as he raised his eyes to Iola's face and anxiously awaited her reply. Dr. Gresham, said Iola sadly, should the story of my life be revealed to your family, they would be willing to ignore all traditions of my blood, forget all the terrible humiliations through which I have passed. I have too much self-respect to enter your home under a veil of concealment. I have lived in New England. I love the sunshine of the homes and the freedom of her institutions, but New England is not free from racial prejudice, and I would never enter a family where I would be an unwelcome member. So, yeah, this book has so many quotables, and it looks like my live sprint is over, so I need to get back on there because it just ended. So, perfect timing for me. And, yeah. Back was hurting, so I came to bed. but anyway, I'm still reading this, and I just finished chapter 14. And Henry got the letter from his sister telling him everything that had just happened and not to come to the South. But he wants to be able to kind of rescue them, and so the dean of the school is like, do you want to enlist in the army? I can set you up with another family if you just want to continue to live up here in the north, or I can enlist you in the army. And so he gets enlisted in the army, and then they asked him, which regiment do you want to be with? Do you want to be with the white or not? And so he's like, I don't want to be with the white regiment. So even though he's like, appears white, the guy is like, what? Because he's used to people of mixed race origins that can pass as white wanting to be in the white regiment. So he's like, I don't understand why you would want to be in the other one. You're not going to have a chance of promotion that way. And the thing is, though, that he thinks it'll up his chances for being able to find his sister and mother. So that's why he joins that. And so that's all that's happened in this chapter. And now I get to move on to chapter 15. Just finished that chapter, and it seems like they won. So now I had marked one of the passages. It brought up the whole Native American thing, and the one guy was like, I wonder why they never tried to enslave them. And then the guy says, you are mistaken, Robert, if you think the Native Americans were never enslaved. Of course, they didn't say Native Americans. They say the older term that's now, like, offensive. Were never enslaved. I have read that the Spaniards who visited the coasts of America kidnapped thousands of them, whom they sent to Europe and the West Indies as slaves. Columbus himself, we are informed, captured 500 natives and sent them to Spain. The Native Americans had the lesser power of endurance, and Las Casas suggested the enslavement of black people because he seemed to possess a greater breadth of physical organization and stronger power of endurance. Slavery was an old world crime, which I have heard the Native Americans never practiced among themselves. Perhaps it would have been harder to reduce them to slavery and hold them in bondage when they had a vast continent before them, where they could hide in the vastness of its mountains or the seclusion of its forests, than it was for white men to visit the coast of Africa, and with their superior knowledge obtain cargoes of slaves, bring them across the ocean, hem them in on the plantations, and surround them with a pall of dense ignorance. I remember, said Robert, in reading a history I once came across at our house, that when the African... It's hard to hold this book with my fingers like this. It's bound tightly, so it's just very awkward to hold it. Oh my, okay. let me see. Um, that when the Africans first came to this country, they did not all speak one language. Some had only met as mutual enemies. They were not all one color, their complexions ranging from tawny yellow to deep black. Yes, said Captain Sybil, and in dealing with them, um, we wanted his labor. In dealing with the Native Americans, we wanted his land. For one, we had weapons of war. For the other, we had real and invisible chains, the coercion of force, and the terror of the unseen world. That is exactly so, Captain. When I was a boy, I used to hear the old folks tale that would happen to bad people in another world, about the devil pouring hot lead down people's throats and stirring them up with the pitchfork. I used to get so scared that I would be afraid to go to bed at night. I don't suppose the Native Americans ever heard of such things, or if they had, I never heard of them being willing to give away all their land on earth and quietly wait for a home in heaven. Um, yeah. So, next chapter. So I just finished that chapter. She meets a guy named Robert, and like she's caring for him or whatever, and she was singing a song, and he recognized the song as one that his sister used to sing, and so he didn't know where his sister had been. And Ola also can see a resemblance to her mother in him. So it's probably her uncle. But of course, slavery had separated families so much, there was no way to really know. And he hadn't seen his sister since childhood. So even seeing the photo of her in the locket that Iola has didn't necessarily confirm that it was her. But some of the history, the shared history between them kind of makes them think that they are relatives. And then Iola was telling him everything that had happened and how she also didn't know where her mother was. And so now we're getting into the next chapter. Now Iola is working at a school to teach the freed people, and then I guess she teaches them too much. People don't like it. People don't like that she's educating them, and so the racists come and they burn down the school. In that chapter, Robert finds his mom. It mentioned how the Jews were like essential to giving black people land, so they would take the money that they earned by being soldiers in the war and purchase land from the Jews because they were willing to sell them property. And then alcohol became a really big thing, and so some people tried to profit off of the now freed people by getting them on alcohol, because if they were addicted to drinking all the time, then they could make money off of them. So a lot of people would take the money from their freedom and their hard-earned work that they did after the war, and they would spend it on booze. And the one woman, his mom, was like, it's a shame that they do that with their money. Like, they understand that they only give them all this alcohol to keep us dumb and not be able to progress. And he was talking about, like, the other ways they try to do stuff like that, too, with schools and all that stuff. So apparently, as well, there was public schools in the North before the war, but there wasn't really a bunch of public schools in the South. So there was educational differences between the North and the South as well. So this is just interesting because it's bringing in all these other topics that I wouldn't have even expected to be touched on in this book. So for chapter 19, Robbie and Iola have dinner with one of the aunties that had been on the plantation, as well as one of the uncle guys that had stayed on the plantation when everyone else went. And he wound up coming into some money. I guess his plantation owner had given him money at some point. And so he was able, once they got free, to actually buy a plantation. So he was like, the old master took to the drink and he lost all his money, so I bought his place. And I was like, that's a way to shove it to him. And he was like, the old master's worse off than me now. I got more than him. And he was like, he's in the poorhouse. And, yeah. So I was like, serves him right. Serves him right. Get his due. They're also talking about how there's injustices, and even though the war is over, now the white men are very much so more brazen because they don't have them under their thumb anymore. So now the stuff like the lynching is happening, and as far as crimes go, if a black person steals a chicken, it's basically going to be given the same weight of a crime of a white person who steals $1,000. And so they're talking about how it ain't fair, but also how the different generations just don't see stuff the same way. So the younger generation that wasn't really in slavery as much, they will take to the gun and they will pull them triggers on the white people. They're not going to be submissive to them in any way. So they're like, the war is over. They're able to pull a trigger on me. I'll pull a trigger on them. And, the auntie was talking about it, and then the uncle guy was like, well, I reckon, white man ain't no better, that sort of thing, because, they're all just free now, so it's like, if I gotta take up my gun, I'll take up my gun. They're not gonna be controlling me anymore. I'm not gonna let nobody call me a coward, was basically what he was saying. So yeah, there was like two uncles in this book. So the one uncle is the one that wound up going, Uncle Ben, I think. And then there was also Uncle Tom, who had died earlier in chapter 7. And then this is Uncle Daniel. So, anyway, he had thought Robbie had died in the war, but he had got shot, and then Iola had brought him back to health. So now I'm going into chapter 20, which is called A Revelation. So I'm thinking she's going to find her mama, or her mama has already died. I'm thinking her mama's already died, and that's going to be what the revelation is. But we'll see. Okay, so now they're talking about election time, and they brought up elections earlier in the book as well, like a couple chapters ago. And so now that the men have freedom, they're able to vote. And basically around election time, the white people will pretty much just be giving them a bunch of alcohol because they want to make them stupid. They either will make them stupid by making them alcoholics and not being able to remember things and function well in society and all of that kind of stuff, or they will manipulate them into voting certain ways. So they'll be like, if you vote for so-and-so, I'll give you this. So there's a lot of election fraud that's happening in here. 21, Robert struggles to find a place to rent for him and his mother. He's white passing, so he did get one place, but then when they discovered that his mother was black, they basically harassed him until he moved. And so then he finally found another person to rent to him. So some of the people were able to buy places, but the ones who were renting had white landlords. And so there was just a lot of struggle to find ones that were nice enough to actually let them live there. And this is something that I heard is still the case in some places where certain people are discouraged from living there. So housing can be harder to find. If you got an HOA or something where they have to vote or approve you to be able to move into their little community, that sort of discrimination still happens today. So it's interesting to see kind of what the beginning of that was in this time. So, chapter 22, Harry, which was the son of Marie and the plantation owner, he finds his mama, Marie. And then he tells her, I want to go with you up to this conference. It's 150 miles away. There was a Methodist church conference. And while he was there in the audience, the preacher dude had made an announcement that Iola was looking for her family. and she had come up to the stage, and he was like, if anyone has any information, please let us know. Because a lot of people were reuniting because during the times of slavery, people would get sold from one plantation to the next, and so they might not see their family for decades. And so now people are trying to reunite. And so Harry is like, I know her. I'm her brother. So then they meet together and she gets to see her mama again. And then she tells her mama that she's pretty sure that she's found um, her brother and her mom. So the woman is like, can it be? Like, I haven't seen them in 30 years. And one of the reasons why they figured out that they were related was that whenever she was nursing Robert back to health after he'd been shot, uh, she would sing him this hymn. And he had not heard the hymn since he had last been with his family. And then she started to look at him and notice that he looked a lot like her brother. And then he had had this like red mole or something on his head. And then he had mentioned that his sister had had a beauty mark. And so they were able to figure out that they were related and who each other was. So I guess people would find each other at these large gatherings because I mean I guess that was your best shot to have a bunch of people in a room that maybe you haven't seen before. So now I'm moving on to chapter 23. We're getting there. We are getting there. Slowly but surely. He gets to see his sister, and then they're all talking about moving north. And also Harry, whatever his name is, was talking about wanting to like contribute to the race because once he found out that he was black, then he had joined the service with the unit as well instead of like being with the white unit. And so he's like, anything that I can do to succeed in life is like a win for my race. And so they're talking about going up north. But also the one person is scared that one of them might act up and then, get killed or something. So she's like, I don't know about that. You're a little bit too hardy or whatever, especially around election time. Like, you speak your mind too much. Basically, put yourself in danger. So, yeah. So now they're talking about places of employment, trying to work places. And the white people don't want black servants. And so she saw a job for a, like, secretary or receptionist or something. So she wants to get that job. And then he's like, I don't think the ad was for black women. Like, they're not going to want you. And she's like, well, I don't reckon I have to tell them that my great-grandmother was black. She's like, I'll just get my job. So we'll see how this is going to go. I still have quite a bit of the book left, considering how much has happened. I've got like a third of the book left, something like that. So this might be where maybe they take two different directions and she decides to like permanently like white pass and he decides not to. So we shall see. Chapter 24, they all moved to the north except for Harry. He had started like a school or something down in the south. So until the school closes, he's going to stay in the south. Iola is trying to work. She wants to work. She doesn't want to just stay at home. She wants to contribute financially, that sort of thing. So she gets the job as the receptionist and she doesn't tell them anything. But then a black woman comes in for services and she recognizes her. So they're chatting it up. And then the other women at the workplace are curious about how she knows this woman. So they start to investigate and ask around. They're kind of like little spies. And they find out that her grandmother is black. And so they start to kind of ignore her and give her the cold shoulder, that sort of thing. So Iola doesn't like that situation. So she goes to the clerk or whatever and she resigns. She's like, I'm not going to work here. Then, the next place that she goes to, she tells them her ancestry so that it won't be a problem. Because she's like, you know what? I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not going to deny it. I'm not going to scream it out from the rooftop just to welcome discrimination. But at the same time, like, I'm not going to deny it. And so when she gets there, he's like, it's fine with me. I don't have a problem with that at all. You're hired. Just don't tell the girls because they might not want to work with you. And so she's like, okay. Well, then they eventually ask her what church she goes to, and she tells them, and they're like, oh, well, it can't be. The only church over there is the black church. And she goes, well, that's where I go. And they are like, I don't understand. Why would you choose to go there? And she goes, because when I moved here, I visited and I liked it. So I, became a member of the church. And they're like, but why would you want to go to a black church? And she says, well, because it's my people. Like, that's where I want to be. And so then they complain, and the guy who hired her just kind of bends to their will and fires her. And so then Iola was like, well, this sucks. And she was a nurse during the wartime, so she's like, maybe I could do a nursing job. There's someone that has a child that's ill that needs care. So she goes and she does tell him her history, and they hire her anyway. And she's able to bring the child, back to wellness. And so once her job is complete as a nurse, they like her so much that he employs her at his store. And what he does is, instead of trying to hide it, he gathers everyone around in the store, tells them her ancestry, and says, if you have a problem with it and don't want to work with her, you can come to the cash register and I'll give you your money and you can leave. So nobody complains and everybody stays, because he's basically like, I am the owner of this store. So if you want to be employed here, you're going to go by my rules. You're not going to dictate my views. And so he just stands up for her and employs her there. And no one leaves because they understand they're not going to be able to manipulate him. And he's like, if everyone would do this, it would solve a lot of the problems. So, yeah, I really enjoyed that she finally found good people to work for. And so now I'm moving on to chapter 25. And I think it's almost time for Princess's Sprints. So I haven't eaten anything either. It's pretty late. I threw on my shirt from yesterday, and I fed the dog and took him outside. That's all I've done. So I haven't been up long. Oh, I stayed up until 3 a.m. last night again. Alright, so the doctor from earlier in the book showed up, and he's still madly in love with Iola. He's still in love with her. And they're all basically saying, everything would be solved if people would actually just follow the Bible. Meaning, like, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Like that one principle. And it would all be good. So then he's gathering with a bunch of people and like a preacher dude or something. And with Robert the next day. So that's all I really know for now. I am going to take a break with reading and watch Sabrina and eat a bowl of cereal. And then it's going to be time for Princess's Sprint. So I read 2 chapters that time. And the doctor has asked Iola to marry him again. And she goes on this big spiel about how there's still the divide between them because society would not approve of them being together. And she feels like it would almost be a rejection of her own race. And that, other women would not see her. Because if they know that she has any African blood, they're going to treat her badly. And so she's like, I'm not going to live a life like that. I'm sorry. I'm just not going to do it. And then they're also talking about the mistreatments in the church and how Iola's mother had went to a church and they did communion. And the mother also is passing. And so they did the communion and someone whispered in the pastor's ear. And then I guess the mom's Catholic. So they took the cup and then they went to the next person. Like, they skipped over her and then had her take communion last. Because, again, like, just people with the whole, like, not wanting to touch or anything like that. Oh my. So yeah, anyway, now I am about to start chapter 28. So we're almost done with this. I'm on page 113 of 134. So almost there, and I've bumped it up to 3-speed. So I was like, let me just see if I can do this. So I bumped it up to 3-speed, and then I have to follow along with like my bookmark and physically, but it was fine. I didn't lose anything. I just have to like really concentrate when I do 3-speed. But yeah, princess sprints are going on, but sometimes the talking periods can be a little while, so I can just double speed the talking period. So I went ahead and finished the chapter I was on. So I don't miss out on anything. Anyway, I had like 20 pages left, so I just couldn't stop to give updates after every chapter because they were only like a page and a half each. But, oh my gosh. So this is the expression I had, like, the whole, the whole, like, last 3 chapters. I was just so happy with everything. Oh my gosh. Okay, so, I gotta backtrack. I gotta remember some stuff. So, I think I told y'all Harry already came back up there and joined them, and he brought a woman with him, who he winds up asking to marry him. In the conclusion of the book. Now, some of the men were all talking. There was a couple of doctors that were talking, and one of them was very much so racist, and he didn't realize that one of the doctors that he had been talking over everything with was black. And he was saying stuff like, oh, I can spot them. I can spot them. It don't matter how white they look. I can spot them in their eyes. Like, I can always tell. And then when he found out that he was wrong and he didn't spot him, I was laughing so hard. Oh, man. Just for him to be like, oh. So I thought that was funny. And then, so then that doctor had told him what had happened was his mother, like, he was white passing and everything like that. And then he found his grandmother at one point, who was a wealthy white woman. And she was like, you know, I will take you in. I will make you my heir since my son has, you know, my son died or whatever. I'll make you my heir if you will just, like, not tell anyone about your lineage. And he refused to do so. He would not do that. So Iola has a lot of respect for him for that and for other people that do the same thing. And even with Robert was kind of applauding him because he was like, you know, for me, I didn't have, like, education and opportunities and all of these things as a white passing person who was on the plantation. But this other guy, he did. Like, he was educated during the times of slavery, and he still chose to not go with the white race on things. And so then he's talking with Iola, and Iola just has a lot of respect for him as well. And they're talking about how she wants to start writing stuff, but there's not, like, a bunch of black people that are published. This was actually, like, one of the first books published by a black person in America. And so I think she kind of, like, you know, took some influence with that final chapter. And he was like, well, I know this woman, and she, you know, she has something to say, and he was describing her, but she, like, didn't realize that he was describing her. And he was like, you know, there are a lot of good books by white people about our plight, but they can never truly, fully understand unless they had, you know, the actual circumstantial upbringing that goes beyond just, like, the color of your skin. There's also parts in here that had to do with travel. And it was talking about the brother coming with his girlfriend, and they would get on the bus, and when they started on the bus, they would be in the black section because people knew of his lineage, But then the further they would get where people didn't know them, then he would actually have black people trying to get him to move to the front of the bus. Because he was like, maybe what I need to do is just like pin I'm a person of color on my shirt, and then there won't be so much animosity where I go. And he's talking about how, being too black for white people, but not black enough for black people. And then when he's proposing to his girlfriend, who happens to be black and not white passing, she's like, what will so and so say? What will so and so say? What will my mother say? And she's like, you do understand it's not only white people that think about that sort of thing, like, because there's colorism within the race itself. And so she was highlighting that. But then, yeah, so the doctor with Iola talking about her, oh my gosh, he was like head over heels for her, and she just didn't see it at all. Oh my gosh. Okay, so whenever she's commending him for what he chose to do, she says, but when others are trying to slip out from the race and pass into white basis, I cannot help admiring one who acts as if he felt that the weaker the race is, the closer he would cling to it. And then she's saying to someone else, talking about him, I know that, uncle, but even these advantages are too dearly bought if they mean loss of honor. Talking about at this point they were talking about her brother, and how he could have... Wait, no. They're talking about Dr. Latimer, the guy that I was talking about that likes Iola. And he wasn't understanding how he could pass up inheriting so much privilege. And she said, I know that, uncle, but even these advantages are too dearly bought if they mean a loss of honor, true manliness, and self-respect. He could not have retained these had he ignored his mother and lived under a veil of concealment, constantly haunted by a dread of detection. The gain would not have been worth the cost, if it were bettered that he should walk the ruggedest paths of life a true man than tread the softest carpets of moral cripple. And then I got like 2 more quotes. Oh, doctor, you cannot conceive what it must have been to be hurled from a home of love and light into the dark abyss of slavery, to be compelled to take your place among a people you have learned to look upon as inferiors and social outcasts, to be in the power of men whose presence would fill you with honor and loathing, and to know that there is no earthly power to protect you from the highest insults which brutal cowardice could shower upon you. I am so glad that no other woman of my race will suffer as I have done. Because, things have ended now. And then they were going in to talk about how the father had hidden her ancestry from her, and she grew up believing that she was white. I never blame him, because I know he did it for the best. Had he lived, he would have taken us to France, where I should have had a life of careless ease and pleasure. But now my life has a much grander significance than it would have had under such conditions. Fearful as the awakening was, it was better than to have slept through life. Best for you and best for me, said Dr. Latimer. There are souls that never awaken, but if they miss the deepest pain, they also lose the highest joy. And so he does wind up marrying Iola, and then they go to the South, and she is like a teacher. And yeah, so this book has a very happy ending. It goes over on like the last page how everyone wound up, where they're at. And yeah. Oh, yeah. And so then we have these books. So she wrote 4 novels. So this is her most famous novel that she wrote. And she wrote a lot of poetry as well. She was a women's suffragist as well as an abolitionist. And after slavery, she wasn't able to go back to the South for a while, to her, where she had originally come from. I don't know what state the author was from. But Yeah, so she just like did a lot. And y'all, the writing is so good. It feels so modern. Like, it feels so modern. Yes, there's the dialect, but like if you listen to the audiobook, it just really adds something to the text. Um, yeah, like look at all these tabs. Oh man, I don't know that I'm gonna be editing all this footage because it is so much footage. I don't want to sit here for 5 hours and edit footage, but like, wow, this book. Highly, highly recommend. This is definitely on my top list of favorite classics of all time. It's been a while since I've read The Counts of Monte Cristo. I really did enjoy that one, so I would say The Counts of Monte Cristo and this for right now. But yeah, I loved it. There was a little bit of romance in here too. Get Iola Leroy! So glad that I picked to feature this with I Read Dead People Book Club because I think that everyone's gonna love it. Even if it's a hard read at times, it's so good. It's so good. Not only does it reflect things that happened in the past, but also just if it was a completely fictionalized story and there had never been slavery at all and someone just came up with this story, it's brilliant. So, absolutely love this. This is going on my favorite books of the year for sure. Thanks for watching. That's all of the vlog. Bye.